the man they judged. The large glass doors of Crown National Bank slid open. Conversation stopped. Not completely, just enough for people to notice. An old black man had entered the building. He moved slowly, leaning on a wooden cane that looked older than some of the employees working inside. His gray jacket was faded. His shoes were worn. His hands carried a thick brown folder. The contrast was impossible to ignore. This was one of the most prestigious banks in the city. The type of place where executives arrived in luxury vehicles, where wealthy investors discussed million-dollar deals, where appearance mattered. And this man looked like he had wandered in from somewhere else entirely. A woman sitting near the entrance quietly pulled her designer handbag closer. Two businessmen exchanged smirks. Even the security guard watched him carefully. The old man noticed. He noticed everything. He had spent his entire life noticing those looks. The looks that came before assumptions. The assumptions that came before discrimination. The discrimination that came before injustice. But he remained calm. His name was Samuel Carter, and nobody inside that bank knew who he really was. Samuel approached the customer service desk. A young employee named Jessica Miller looked up. At first she smiled. Then her eyes moved over his clothes. The smile disappeared. "Can I help you?" she asked. The words sounded professional. The tone did not. Samuel placed his folder on the counter. "Good morning. I seem to be having trouble with one of my accounts." Jessica glanced at the folder, then at Samuel, then back at the folder. She didn't open it. She didn't ask for identification. She didn't ask for an account number. Instead, she said something else. "Are you sure you're in the right bank?" Samuel stared at her. "Excuse me. This is a private banking institution." The message was clear. People like you don't belong here. Several nearby customers overheard. A few smiled. Samuel felt the familiar sting. Not because it hurt anymore, because it reminded him how little had changed, even after all these years. Still, he remained polite. "I've been banking here longer than most people in this building have been alive." Jessica gave a short laugh. She thought it was a joke. It wasn't. "Please have a seat," she said dismissively. "We'll get to you when we can." Samuel nodded. Then he quietly walked toward the waiting area. The whispers started immediately, and every single one reached his ears. What nobody realized was that Samuel hadn't survived 80 years by being unaware. He heard every word, every insult, every assumption, and with each one, he remembered. He remembered exactly why he had come. A lifetime of injustice. Samuel sat quietly in the waiting area. Around him, people continued their conversations. Employees moved from desk to desk. Customers discussed investments and business deals. Life inside the bank went on as if nothing unusual had happened. But Samuel's mind had already drifted decades into the past. Back to a very different America. Back to a time when the color of a person's skin often determined how they would be treated before they even spoke a word. Samuel had been born into poverty. His father worked long hours at a factory. His mother cleaned homes for wealthy families. Neither of them complained. They simply worked. Every day, every week, every year, because survival left little room for anything else. As a young boy, Samuel quickly learned that life wasn't always fair. He remembered entering stores where people followed him around. He remembered teachers who expected less from him. He remembered signs and rules that silently reminded him where society believed he belonged. Those memories never truly disappeared. They simply became part of him. When Samuel turned 18, he enlisted in the military. He wanted to serve his country. He wanted to create opportunities for himself. He wanted to prove that his future would not be limited by other people's expectations. Military life was difficult. There were long days, long nights, moments of fear, moments of sacrifice, moments that would stay with him forever. He watched friends make the ultimate sacrifice. He learned discipline, responsibility, leadership, and perseverance. When his service ended, Samuel returned home believing life might finally become easier. Instead, he discovered that some battles followed him home. Many people still judged him before they knew him. Some saw his skin color before they saw his character. Others saw his appearance before they saw his potential. But Samuel refused to become bitter. He refused to allow prejudice to define his future. So he worked harder than anyone expected, construction during the day, driving trucks at night, studying business whenever he found spare time. Every dollar mattered. Every opportunity mattered. Every lesson mattered. Years passed, then decades. Slowly, Samuel began investing. At first, the amounts were small. A few dollars here, a few dollars there. But he remained patient. While others chased quick success, Samuel focused on long-term growth. His investments grew. His knowledge grew. His confidence grew. Eventually, he began purchasing stakes in small businesses, then larger businesses, then real estate, then financial institutions. One investment, in particular, changed everything. A struggling regional bank was on the verge of collapse. Experts believed it would fail. Investors were pulling out. Employees feared losing their jobs. Most people saw risk. Samuel saw opportunity. He invested, then invested again, and again. Over time, his ownership stake increased. The bank survived, then expanded, then became one of the most successful banking institutions in the region. That institution was now known as Crown National Bank. The very same bank where Samuel sat being treated like he didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years helping build something designed to serve people fairly. Yet here he was, being judged by employees who knew nothing about him. A group of customers nearby laughed quietly. Samuel overheard one of them. "Why is that homeless guy still sitting here?" The words stung, not because Samuel cared what they thought, but because he knew countless others had probably experienced the same treatment. People who didn't secretly own part of the bank. People who had no power, no influence, no one willing to listen to them. Samuel slowly tightened his grip on his cane. The issue wasn't personal anymore. If this was happening to him, how many others had suffered the same treatment? That question lingered in his mind, and before the day was over, he would discover the answer. Meanwhile, inside a nearby office, branch manager Richard Holloway glanced through the glass walls at the elderly man sitting alone. Richard frowned. He had already heard about the situation from Jessica Miller. To him, it seemed like a waste of time. Just another person who didn't belong in a high-end financial institution. At least, that's what he assumed. And that assumption was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. Samuel looked at the clock. More than an hour had passed. No one had called his name. No one had checked his account. No one had apologized. Yet somehow, he wasn't surprised. Because after everything he had experienced throughout his life, he recognized discrimination the moment he saw it. And he knew something important. People often reveal their true character when they believe there will be no consequences. What Richard Holloway didn't know was that consequences were already on their way, and they would arrive sooner than anyone expected. The humiliation. More than an hour had passed. Samuel Carter was still waiting. The same chair, the same corner of the lobby, the same folder resting in his lap, and the same feeling that he was being intentionally ignored. Around him, customers came and went. Employees greeted wealthy clients with smiles. Executives were escorted into private offices. Coffee was served. Hands were shaken. Business was conducted. Yet somehow, no one had found a single minute to assist him. Samuel watched quietly. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But he was paying attention. Every interaction, every expression, every decision. Because what he was witnessing wasn't simply poor customer service. It was something deeper, something more troubling. Several employees glanced in his direction and immediately looked away. Others whispered. A few laughed. One young banker walked past and muttered something under his breath. The people nearby chuckled. Samuel heard enough to understand. They thought he was a joke, an inconvenience, someone who didn't belong, someone beneath them. After another 15 minutes passed, Samuel slowly stood. The conversations around him quieted. People noticed movement. They watched as the elderly man picked up his folder and adjusted his cane. Instead of walking toward the exit, he headed directly toward the manager's office. Inside, Richard Holloway noticed immediately. His smile disappeared. Richard had been reviewing investment proposals with a wealthy client when he saw Samuel approaching through the glass walls. He sighed heavily. "Excuse me for a moment," he told the client. Richard stepped outside his office. The moment he did, several employees stopped working. Everyone sensed something was about to happen. Samuel reached the office door. Richard blocked his path. "Can I help you?" Richard asked. The words sounded professional. The tone wasn't. Samuel held out the folder. "I've been waiting for quite some time." Richard crossed his arms. "And I need assistance with my account." Richard didn't take the folder. Instead, he glanced briefly at Samuel's clothes. The worn jacket, the old shoes, the cane. Then he smirked. Samuel noticed. So did everyone else. "I believe there may be a problem with my account," Samuel continued calmly. Richard shook his head. "I seriously doubt that." The lobby grew quieter. Samuel remained composed. "What do you mean?" Richard laughed softly. "The people who usually have problems with their accounts are the ones who actually have money in them." A few employees laughed. Several customers smiled. The humiliation was now public. Samuel looked directly into Richard's eyes. "Have you checked my account?" "No." "Have you reviewed any information?" "No." "Then how can you make that assumption?" Richard's smile widened. "Because I've worked in banking for a long time." He gestured towards Samuel. "I can usually tell." The words hung in the air. Samuel knew exactly what Richard meant. Everyone did. Richard wasn't judging facts. He wasn't judging account records. He wasn't judging financial history. He was judging appearance. And perhaps something else. Something Samuel had experienced his entire life. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. Then Samuel asked a simple question. "Do you believe you know who I am?" Richard chuckled. "I know enough." The answer drew another round of laughter from a few nearby employees. Samuel slowly nodded. For several seconds, he simply stood there. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. "No." He shook his head. "You don't know anything about me." The laughter faded. The confidence on Richard's face weakened slightly. Samuel took one small step forward. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just enough to make his point. "You looked at my clothes. You made assumptions. You refused to do your job." Richard's jaw tightened. Samuel continued. "You judged me before checking a single fact." The entire lobby had fallen silent. Even wealthy clients were watching now. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Richard attempted to regain control. "I think it's time for you to leave." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Leave?" "Yes." Richard pointed toward the front doors. "I have important clients to assist." The insult was obvious. Important clients. Meaning Samuel wasn't one. Meaning Samuel wasn't worth his time. Meaning Samuel didn't belong. Samuel looked around the lobby. Dozens of eyes stared back at him. Some curious. Some uncomfortable. Some amused. Then he turned back toward Richard. For the first time all day, there was disappointment in his voice. Not anger. Disappointment. "I spent my entire life believing people could do better." The room became completely silent. Samuel slowly picked up his folder. "But I suppose some lessons still need to be learned." Richard rolled his eyes, clearly eager for the situation to end. Samuel nodded once, then turned toward the exit. As he reached the front doors, he stopped. The entire bank watched. Without looking back, Samuel spoke one final sentence. A sentence that would haunt Richard Holloway for the next 24 hours. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career." The words sent a chill through the room. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Even Richard felt a brief moment of unease. But it disappeared almost immediately. After all, what could an elderly man in worn-out clothes possibly do? Richard laughed. The employees laughed with him. The customers returned to their conversations. And within minutes, the incident was forgotten. Or so they thought, because one person in the building couldn't stop thinking about it. A junior employee named Ethan Brooks. Unlike everyone else, Ethan hadn't laughed. He hadn't whispered. And he certainly hadn't enjoyed what he had witnessed. Something about Samuel Carter didn't make sense. There was dignity in the way he carried himself, confidence in the way he spoke, and a quiet strength that was impossible to ignore. As Samuel disappeared through the bank's front doors, Ethan stared after him. A feeling settled in his stomach. A feeling he couldn't explain. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And before the day was over, Ethan would discover a secret capable of shaking the entire bank to its foundation. The only employee who cared. For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan Brooks couldn't focus. He reviewed files, answered emails, and processed paperwork, but his mind kept returning to the same image. Samuel Carter, standing in the bank lobby, being mocked and dismissed. What bothered Ethan wasn't that Samuel had argued. It was that he hadn't. The elderly man had remained calm, respectful, and patient even while being humiliated. That kind of self-control was rare. Nearby, Jessica Miller laughed with another employee. "Can you believe that guy?" she said. "He probably thought this was a charity office." They laughed. Ethan looked away. Something about it felt wrong. Good people didn't enjoy humiliating strangers. As closing time approached, Ethan noticed a brown folder left on a table near the waiting area. Samuel's folder. He picked it up and carried it to his desk so he could locate the owner's contact information. After entering the account number into the bank system, something unusual appeared. Extra security layers. Restricted ownership classifications. Curious, Ethan continued. Then the account loaded, and Ethan froze. The balance was staggering. Millions, then hundreds of millions. His heart raced as he opened additional records. What he discovered left him speechless. Samuel Carter controlled the Carter Legacy Trust, and that trust owned 62% of Crown National Bank. The man everyone had mocked owned the bank. The man Richard Holloway had publicly humiliated controlled the institution's future. Ethan kept reading. 30 years earlier, when Crown National Bank had been on the verge of collapse, Samuel had invested his own fortune and saved it. Thousands of jobs had survived because of him, yet he had never sought recognition. Now Ethan understood the terrible mistake everyone had made. Richard, Jessica, the entire staff. None of them knew who Samuel really was. And when they found out, everything would change. Ethan quickly printed the ownership records and rushed to Richard Holloway's office. The branch manager was laughing with a wealthy client. "Sir, you need to see this," Ethan said. Richard barely looked up. "It's about the man from earlier." Richard rolled his eyes. "Not this again." "Sir, please. This is important." Reluctantly, Richard glanced at the documents before tossing them aside. "I don't have time to read reports about random people." Ethan stared in disbelief. "Sir, he's not random." Richard stood and pointed toward the door. "I said I'm busy. Get back to work." Ethan slowly gathered the papers. Richard had just ignored the most important information of his career for the same reason he had ignored Samuel in the first place. Arrogance. As Ethan walked away, one thought echoed in his mind. Tomorrow was going to change everything. Because somewhere across the city, Samuel Carter already knew what had happened. And unlike Richard Holloway, Samuel understood a simple truth. Character is revealed when people believe there will be no consequences. The problem for Richard was that the consequences were already on their way. The secret no one was supposed to find. That night, Samuel Carter sat quietly in his study. The room reflected the life he had always preferred. Simple, modest, and filled with family memories rather than displays of wealth. Across from him sat his longtime attorney, Benjamin Hayes. After listening to Samuel describe everything that had happened at the bank, Benjamin grew increasingly concerned. Jessica Miller had dismissed him. Customers had laughed at him. Employees had mocked him. And Richard Holloway had publicly humiliated him. When Samuel finished, Benjamin asked a simple question. "Do you believe this was an isolated incident?" Samuel answered immediately. "No." The response told Benjamin everything he needed to know. A single rude employee was one thing. An entire branch behaving the same way suggested a much deeper problem. Samuel looked at an old photograph of employees from decades earlier. "We built this institution to serve everyone," he said quietly. Then he gave the order. "I want answers." By sunrise, a confidential investigation was underway. Auditors, compliance officers, legal advisors, and human resources specialists gathered at headquarters. Nothing was off limits. Customer complaints would be reviewed, security footage examined, records reopened, every decision scrutinized. Meanwhile, Richard Holloway arrived at work completely unaware. As far as he was concerned, the previous day's incident was over. The old man was gone. Problem solved. Across the branch, Ethan Brooks sat quietly, carrying the burden of what he had discovered. He knew Samuel Carter wasn't an ordinary customer. He knew the truth would eventually come out. And when it did, everything would change. By noon, Investigators had uncovered dozens of complaints connected to Richard's branch. Ignored customers, disrespectful treatment, claims of discrimination, complaints that had been quietly dismissed for years. The evidence pointed to something larger than individual mistakes. It revealed a culture built on appearances and assumptions. Then investigators reviewed security footage. The room fell silent. They watched wealthy customers receive immediate attention. Others were left waiting. Older customers were often dismissed. Minority customers were treated differently. Then came the footage of Samuel Carter's visit. Jessica dismissing him, employees whispering, customers laughing, Richard publicly humiliating him. The video was worse than Samuel had described. One investigator shook his head. What if Samuel Carter had simply been an ordinary customer? Nobody answered, because everyone knew the truth. Without Samuel's ownership, none of this would have been investigated. That realization was deeply troubling. That evening, Benjamin delivered the preliminary report. The file was thick, far thicker than expected. Samuel reviewed complaint after complaint without changing expression. Finally, he closed the folder. What happens next? Benjamin asked. We finished the investigation, Samuel replied. And after that, Samuel's eyes settled on the names of Richard Holloway and Jessica Miller, then on a long list of customers who had never received justice. His answer was calm. After that, we make things right. The truth was finally coming to light. And once the truth emerges, it cannot be hidden again. Meanwhile, Richard Holloway sat comfortably in his office, completely unaware that a storm was gathering around him. A storm powerful enough to destroy everything he had spent years building. And by this time tomorrow, his life would never be the same. The investigation goes deeper. The next morning seemed normal at Crown National Bank. Employees arrived with coffee. Phones rang. Customers entered through the revolving doors. But behind the scenes, everything had changed. The investigation had entered a new phase. Inside a secure conference room, investigators reviewed dozens of customer complaints connected to Richard Holloway's branch. Many had been ignored. Others had been closed without review. Several had disappeared entirely. That discovery raised immediate concerns. Complaints don't simply vanish. Someone had made them disappear. One complaint came from Evelyn Parker, a retired teacher who sought help after her husband's death. Instead of receiving guidance, she was treated with impatience and eventually left in tears. Her complaint was quietly closed. Another came from a military veteran who felt judged despite having substantial investments. His complaint had also vanished. As investigators reviewed more files, a troubling pattern emerged. Assumptions, dismissiveness, bias, arrogance, and in many cases, Richard Holloway's involvement. By midday, investigators uncovered internal emails from Richard. One message instructed staff to focus on high-value clients first. At first, it seemed harmless, but additional emails revealed the truth. Employees were being encouraged to judge customers by appearance before verifying their accounts. Expensive suits received immediate attention. Ordinary clothing did not. The practice wasn't official policy, but Richard had allowed it to become part of the branch culture. Meanwhile, unfamiliar compliance officers arrived at the branch. They reviewed records, examined footage, and interviewed employees. Rumors spread quickly. For the first time, Jessica Miller appeared nervous, and Richard was beginning to feel the pressure. A short phone call from headquarters left him visibly shaken. He immediately started reviewing reports and contacting staff, but it was already too late. The investigation had moved beyond his control. As word spread through professional circles, former customers began coming forward. A businessman described being ignored because he arrived in work clothes. A grandmother said employees repeatedly spoke down to her. A young entrepreneur claimed he wasn't taken seriously until revealing the size of his company. Each testimony strengthened the case. Each exposed another failure. Samuel Carter personally reviewed many of the accounts. The stories troubled him deeply, not because of money, because of dignity. People deserved respect regardless of wealth, appearance, or status. That principle had guided him throughout his life. Now he was discovering how far the bank had drifted from those values. Late that evening, Benjamin Hayes arrived with another report. This one contained a shocking discovery. Multiple managers had previously warned leadership about Richard Holloway. There were concerns about his leadership, customer treatment, and management style. Yet the warnings had been ignored. Richard continued receiving promotions, bonuses, and praise. Samuel slowly closed the report. His disappointment grew. The problem wasn't just Richard. The problem was that others had seen the warning signs and failed to act. That failure had allowed the culture to spread. Finally, Samuel looked up. Prepare a full board meeting. Benjamin nodded. The investigation had reached a point where action was unavoidable. The kind of action that changes careers and changes organizations. Across the city, Richard Holloway sat alone in his office long after everyone else had left. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear. He stared out at the empty lobby where Samuel Carter had stood only days earlier. The same lobby where employees laughed. The same lobby where Richard believed he held all the power. Now he wasn't so sure, because somewhere out there, Samuel Carter was preparing his next move. And Richard was beginning to realize a terrifying truth. The elderly man he had dismissed as unimportant might be the most important person he had ever met. And when the board meeting arrived, the truth would finally come crashing down on everyone. The return of Samuel Carter. The following morning, the atmosphere inside Crown National Bank felt different. Rumors of audits, investigations, and compliance reviews had spread throughout the branch. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone knew something serious was unfolding. Richard Holloway felt it most. He arrived early, reviewed reports, checked emails, and made phone calls, yet the knot in his stomach refused to disappear. Then, at exactly 11 a.m., the bank's doors opened. The lobby fell silent. Samuel Carter had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was attorney Benjamin Hayes. Behind them came compliance officers, senior executives, and 2 members of the board of directors. The effect was immediate. Employees stopped working. Customers turned to stare. Jessica Miller went pale. Ethan Brooks watched quietly, knowing this moment had been inevitable. When Richard stepped from his office and saw the group, his heart sank. Every instinct told him something was terribly wrong. Samuel stopped in the center of the lobby, the same place where he had been humiliated days earlier. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smiling. He simply looked disappointed. And somehow, that felt worse. Richard forced a nervous smile. "Mr. Carter." Samuel nodded politely. "Mr. Holloway, what brings you back today?" Samuel glanced around the room. "So everyone can learn an important lesson." Silence filled the lobby. Benjamin Hayes stepped forward and opened a portfolio. After a comprehensive review conducted by Crown National Bank's Compliance Department, Legal Division, and Board of Directors, multiple violations of customer service standards, leadership policies, and anti-discrimination protocols have been confirmed. Several employees gasped. Richard's face lost color. Board member Linda Grant stepped forward. "The evidence against you is overwhelming, Mr. Holloway." Richard said nothing. He already knew. Then came the revelation. Linda turned toward the crowd. For those who may not know, Samuel Carter is the controlling trustee of the Carter Legacy Trust. The room grew still. The Carter Legacy Trust owns 62% of Crown National Bank. A wave of shock swept through the branch. The elderly man they had mocked owned the bank. The man they had dismissed controlled its future. Richard looked as though the floor had vanished beneath him. This can't be happening. Samuel met his gaze calmly. It already has. The outcome had been decided. The investigation was complete. The evidence was undeniable. Then Samuel addressed the entire branch. "When I walked into this bank, I wasn't looking for special treatment." The room remained silent. "I wasn't looking for recognition or respect because of my position." Several employees lowered their heads. "I was looking for basic human decency." The words hit harder than any accusation. "You didn't know who I was," Samuel continued. And that's exactly the point. Everyone finally understood. If Samuel had been an ordinary customer, none of this would have happened. No investigation, no accountability, no consequences. Benjamin Hayes then opened another folder containing the board's final resolutions. Official decisions. Career-changing decisions. Richard stared at the documents, because somewhere inside those pages was his future. And it wasn't the future he had imagined. The moment of judgment had arrived, and within minutes, everything would change. Judgment Day. The silence inside Crown National Bank was overwhelming. Every eye remained fixed on the documents in Benjamin Hayes' hands. Richard Holloway stood frozen. The confidence and arrogance that once defined him were gone. Now, there was only fear. Benjamin opened the folder. Following the findings of the investigation and the unanimous recommendation of the board of directors, Richard Holloway is hereby removed from his position as branch manager effective immediately. Gasps filled the lobby. Richard lowered his head. Years of authority vanished in a single moment. Benjamin continued. All managerial privileges are revoked, pending final review. The decision was final. Then Richard stepped forward. Mr. Carter. Samuel looked at him calmly. I made a mistake. The room listened. I judged you. I assumed things about you that weren't true. His voice trembled. I wasn't just wrong about you. I've been wrong about people for a long time. The apology was sincere. After a long silence, Samuel spoke. I accept your apology. Relief briefly crossed Richard's face. But Samuel continued. Acceptance doesn't remove consequences. Richard nodded. He understood. Forgiveness and accountability are not the same thing. Samuel then turned toward Jessica Miller. The young teller looked terrified. Jessica, what happened here? Tears filled her eyes. I judged you because of how you looked. And I made assumptions instead of checking facts. I forgot every customer deserves respect. Samuel nodded. Then learn from it. Jessica looked surprised. Every mistake contains a lesson. The people who grow are the people who choose to learn. She wiped away her tears. I will. Next, Samuel turned toward Ethan Brooks. The room watched closely. When everyone else ignored me, you treated me like a human being. Ethan nodded. You didn't know who I was. So why did you help me? The answer came instantly. Because you needed help. The room fell silent. Samuel smiled. That's what leadership looks like. Benjamin handed Samuel a document. Samuel passed it to Ethan. His eyes widened as he read it. It was a promotion letter. Congratulations, Samuel said. Effective immediately, you are the new branch manager of Crown National Bank. The lobby erupted into applause. Everyone knew Ethan had earned it through integrity, kindness, and character. When the applause faded, Samuel addressed the room one final time. When I was young, there were places I wasn't welcome. There were people who judged me before I ever spoke. The room listened quietly, but I learned something important. He paused. The people who judge others reveal more about themselves than the people they judge. His words struck every heart in the building. Never measure a person's worth by their clothes. A pause. Never measure a person's worth by their bank account. Another pause. And never measure a person's worth by the color of their skin. Many employees wiped away tears. Samuel picked up his cane and looked around the lobby. Every person who walks through these doors deserves dignity. Not because of what they own, but because they are human. Then he turned toward the exit. Before leaving, he stopped one last time. The easiest thing in the world is to respect powerful people. The room became silent. The true test of character is how you treat people who appear powerless. Then Samuel Carter walked out of the bank. Not as an owner, not as a wealthy investor, but as a man who reminded an entire institution what respect truly means. And from that day forward, Crown National Bank would never be the same again. Narrator outro. What would you have done if you were Ethan Brooks? Would you have helped Samuel Carter when everyone else ignored him? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, character is revealed not by how we treat the powerful, but by how we treat those who can do nothing for us.